This is a video explaining databases, how to get to them, and how to navigate them through the University of Utah's website. We should start by defining what a database is. A database is an archive of information. It's organized in a certain way for use by a professional community. There are a lot of different databases on a lot of different topics. There will be databases on, for instance, legal precedents, or on specific chemicals, or on specific genes, and there will be various different articles or resources of information on those chemicals or on those genes, and people that are working as chemists will use those databases as part of their day-to-day work. Now, the databases that we are going to be dealing with most often as students are article databases. They will contain archives of usually academic articles, occasionally articles from the popular press as well, and students are asked to use them for their research. For the record, I've got nothing against Google, and I think Google is fine. You can go and do a regular internet search, but understand that the internet, as you often experience it, is not the same thing as a database. A database is usually sort of private access. You need a code to get into it, and they are very specific archives of information for very specific purposes. Let's get to them and start playing around. So I am on the University of Utah website. As you can see, there's lots of articles about COVID-19. It tells you the state of the world as I make this video. Where I am trying to get to is the Marriott Library. So I can click on academics, scroll down until I get to libraries, and then click on Marriott Library. Let's face it, I could also just Google Marriott Library and get here just as easily. Once I'm on the library's homepage, that's lib.utah.edu, I click on databases. And that will bring up an alphabetized list. Every letter of this alphabet has numerous databases listed underneath it, and there are several hundred of these. We've got an archive of the Salt Lake Tribune going back for a long time. This one, called Scopus, is the one that I asked my upper division students to use quite a bit. It has a particular focus on the hard sciences, and it has a lot of convenient features when you're looking for academic articles that are fitting a certain genre or that are fitting a certain criteria. There are a lot of these. Most of them you're never going to deal with. A lot of them are very specific to a given community or a given research profession, and most of the time it's not something that you, the average student, have to deal with. You will, however, almost certainly spend some time with this one. Academic Search Ultimate is the most popular database, at least among freshman classes, and there's a reason for that. It has a really big archive of information. Both peer-reviewed sources and academic sources are contained on Academic Search Ultimate, and that's part of the reason it's so widely used. It covers the major newspapers, major magazines, but also the peer-reviewed journals that are out there. Their archive goes back to 1965. That's good and bad. I will say there are occasions where students will run across an article in a database that is literally 200 years old. One particular one called JSTOR goes back hundreds of years, and that can obviously lead a student astray if the student thinks he or she is dealing with an article that's much more current. 1965 is not so old. Let's click on this and have a quick lesson on how to use it. Click on Academic Search Ultimate, and on the front page I get numerous different filters and options. I usually would leave all of these alone on my initial search. You will have an opportunity later on to play around with most of these, and there are a couple that are really useful, but when I'm initially searching for something, I don't like to have any limitations on my first few search queries. So I'm going to type in the word pesticide. And let's say I want to look at a particular issue that comes up with pesticides and bees. They've got it archived for me, but before I get to that, I'm just going to click search and look for pesticides. The issue with pesticides and bees, if you don't know, there are some serious strains on bee populations in the United States. A lot of them are collapsing, and it was for a while a mystery as to why, but these days the mystery has largely been solved. It's a certain class of pesticides that are still frustratingly in use and are causing some major problems for bees, which are useful for our entire agricultural system. But I digress. Let's just look at what we got when I typed in pesticides. So we've got 117,000 articles under the topic pesticides. That means it was in the title or in the abstract or in the subject heading. Clearly, we do not want to look through 117,000 articles. So we need to narrow that down. And the way we narrow that down is by using the word and. And let's just type in bees. So if I type in pesticides and bees, instead of 117,000 articles, I'm going to get 1,684 articles. So this little and is called a Boolean operator, and I have a diagram here that I want to look at really quickly to demonstrate how these work. The word and, as we just barely used it, helps narrow a search down. If we look at this circle and we say this circle has all of the articles that in some way involve endangered species, and this circle involves all of the articles that in some way involve global warming, if I combine those two search terms with an and, then I'm getting that little cross section that involves both endangered species and global warming in that article. Now, the word or, a little bit less commonly used but still useful at times, helps you search for two terms that are synonymous with one another. In this example, we have corn ethanol and corn fuel, or another example that I've used before is guns or firearms. Sometimes articles will archive the word firearms, sometimes they will archive the word guns, and if you want to do a paper on gun violence in America, then you might want to have both of those search terms in your query. Another example, drugs or narcotics. The two can go hand in hand, and so sometimes it's useful to broaden the search out. So and narrows the search down, or broadens the search out and makes it wider. Not is a word that you don't have to use very often, but in this example, it's actually a really good one. If you were wanting to do a research paper on dolphins off the coast of Miami, and you want nothing at all to do with the football team, then not football would probably be a useful thing to put into your search. It would eliminate all those hits that in some way involve the Miami Dolphins, and you would just be focusing on the species swimming around off the coast of Miami. So these Boolean operators are necessary if you're using these databases. You've got to tie these in. It does not work in the same way that a Google search works, where you just type in random phrases. Instead, you have to try multiple different keywords connected with either and or not. And I do encourage students to come up with around 10 keywords. It's often useful for them to have a pretty good variation in the amount of searches that they do. So try to come up with, I'd say at least 10 words that you could tie in various different combinations to help you do these searches. Now I want to narrow this down just a little bit further, and it is partly because I want to demonstrate one other little thing you should be aware of when you're searching. So if I type in pesticides and bees and pollination, and that's going to narrow it down even further. So instead of 1,684 articles, that is going to give me 258. So that narrowed it down quite a lot. But here's what I want to do. I want to broaden it out just a little bit by doing this. If I get rid of that little ION at the end of that word, and instead I write pollinate and then I have an asterisk, that creates what is called a wildcard. And that searches for the root of this word, but then you'll get various variations on it. So I'm going to be searching for pollination and pollinator and pollinators. It's going to have any of those words are implied by this. Please use the asterisk if you're using a word that kind of gives you the opportunity to do so. You'll be getting a lot more hits, and if you're not using it, you might be overlooking some articles that are potentially useful for you. So if I click on that, instead of 258, I'm going to get 562. That almost doubled my search, and that's really useful. That's awesome. That's what we use the wildcard for. If I was just typing in pollination, I would have gotten far fewer hits. Let's take a moment to look at what we have here. So I want to point out that a lot of those filters that were available on the first page, I kind of skipped past them then. Now might be a good time to apply some of them. We could definitely narrow the date range. Going back to 1977, this was not such an issue. It started to be an issue right around the year, I want to say it was about 2005 or so, is when I first started to hear about honeybee colonies collapsing. That didn't eliminate too many articles, but that did bring us up, so we're a little bit more recent. I also want to point out that you can limit the source type, and this is a really useful feature that you should take advantage of. and this is a really useful feature that you should take advantage of. Please note right here we've got academic journals or peer-reviewed journals. The two terms are synonymous with one another. I've got magazine articles, I've got newspaper articles. You should definitely take advantage of this feature if you are searching on Academic Search Ultimate. There are certain classes that will require you to use only academic or peer-reviewed journals. On the other hand, there might be times when the academic journals are maybe a little bit more intense than what you're looking for, and so it would be better to click on, say, magazines. And let's just try that right now. If I click on magazines, maybe I should have clicked on newspapers too. Let's just do that. I'm going to be limiting my search to only the stuff that is published in the popular press, as opposed to the stuff that might be published in Nature. So let's look at another feature of what we have here. I'm just going to quickly take a look at this article. There's some information here that is potentially useful. I do want to note that it will usually give you a page count. So this article is only 1 page long, whereas this article is 5 pages long. Sometimes that's just a useful thing to glance at, and I can also set different filters so I'm not getting those short articles. I also want to look at this little symbol right here. It's a magnifying glass over the top of a paper, and if I hold my cursor on that, then I get an abstract that tells me what the article is about. The article offers information on global decrease in wild bee diversity according to an analysis of bee collections and observations. And let's say I read through this and it seems like a potentially interesting article, or well, let's just say maybe it doesn't seem like an interesting article. Maybe it seems like it's not what I'm looking for at all. Either way, I saved myself a little bit of time by looking at that abstract. I can click on the full text and read this whole article right now, but it's almost always preferable to take a moment, hold your cursor over that, and read what the abstract has to say. So now that I'm on this page, I can see numerous different bits of information that could potentially be useful for me. I can look up the author. Sometimes you will find that the same person writes about an issue repeatedly for various publications, and it might be worth looking into the author's background. I can also look at various different other keywords that this article is placed under, and I can browse through issues of the magazine if I'm unfamiliar with it and kind of get a feeling for what that magazine is about. I also, if I scroll down, have the HTML version of the article. You can get a PDF version as well. Usually the PDF is a little bit better, but there's reasons you might want the HTML sometimes. Over on the right hand side, there's a lot of different options. I'm not going to focus on too many of them right now, but there are two particular ones I want you to be aware of. One of them is the cite option. If I click on cite, then it gives me the proper citation for this article. There is how it looks in APA. I can scroll on down the page a little bit. There's how it looks in MLA. It's got all of these different methods of citation, and that's useful obviously for putting together your bibliography so you don't have to do the citations manually. The other button that I want you all to be aware of is this one, email, and you can email the article to yourself to kind of keep a persistent link to it. Let's say you start skimming through the article, you're not totally sure if you want to use it. That sometimes is a really useful thing for you to do, to email it to yourself. There are a lot of other options over here. You can create an account for these databases. I've had students give me mixed reviews on how well that has worked out for them, but if you have an account, then it keeps an archive of the research that you've done, and you can save articles to your account. That can be really useful. I also have had 1 or 2 students complain that they thought they were saving articles and nothing actually got saved, so I don't know for sure if that's a good idea. What I can say is that if you know there's an article that you're potentially interested in for your paper, you can of course save the thing to a hard drive, but I also want to point out that you can email a link to yourself so you can always come back to that article. So in a nutshell, that is Academic Search Ultimate. I want you to get on this and play around with it. I have nothing against using just the general internet for finding articles. It's fine, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with Google. Go ahead and use it. But you also should develop a familiarity with these databases, and this particular one that we're looking at, Academic Search Ultimate, is probably the most useful one for you to get to know. Just for the sake of redundancy, let's go back and remind ourselves how to get here. If I go to the libraries and then I go to the Marriott Library and then I go to databases. That's where I get to my alphabetized list. There are a lot of these that you might be dealing with as a student. The one that matters to us right now and that I want you to use for this upcoming paper is Academic Search Ultimate. Please familiarize yourself with it, and if you have any questions about how to find articles on it, let me know.